Hi there, and welcome to the next in the MonoGame for Android development series. It's been a while since my last screencast. There's been a lot going on in MonoGame in the last few months, principally the Windows 8 Metro port has started. We've also got a PlayStation Suite port on the go, so we've been busy working on that kind of thing, that stuff. I thought we'd come back to the Android side of things because we've had some recent releases of the Android SDK that are hopefully going to make developing games using MonoGame for Android a little bit easier and a little bit more accessible to people who don't actually have Android devices. Before we actually get started, let's go over the tools that we need to use MonoGame for Android. First thing you'll need is Visual Studio 2010 Professional or above. The Android side of things doesn't work on the Express version of Visual Studio. However, if you do want to just write Windows or Linux based games using MonoGame, then the Express version will do fine. But if you want to use Mono for Android, you'll need Professional or above. The alternatives to that is to obviously use MonoDevelop, which is just recently been updated to version 3. It's a nice free IDE that you can use to develop games, or any C# application basically, or F# or Visual Basic even. You'll actually need a copy of Mono for Android as well. Before the SDK developments that we're going to go through in a second, developing a game with Mono for Android and MonoGame actually required you to have a device to test on, because the emulator only supported software rendering. But thanks to Google's new SDK, we've now got a hardware accelerated image in the emulator. So if you want to just try out MonoGame and Mono for Android, then that option is available now. You don't need to have a hardware device to have a mess around with it, and we'll have a look at that in a minute. And obviously we're going to need MonoGame. The latest release is 2.5. We've also got a 3D branch that's on the go, which is where all the Windows Metro support and all the PlayStation Suite stuff is going in. That's not in a stable state for release yet. The 2.5 release is 2D only, but if you want to have a look at the Develop 3D branch, then all the code is up there for people to have a play with. So, as I've already hinted, we're going to be looking at the hardware accelerated Android emulator today and how it would help you write games using MonoGame. Google have introduced this in a release that's been fairly recent. It is only available for Android 4.0.3 and above only. So if you're still using older Android images, you still won't be able to use hardware acceleration. But the particular image for 4.0.3 does include OpenGL ES2 hardware acceleration, which is kind of good, because in the last release, 2.5 release, we actually added OpenGL ES 2.0 support. So that means that MonoGame can now actually run hardware accelerated within the emulator. As with everything on Android, the platform is quite fragmented, so it's always a wise idea to actually test your app on as many devices as you can, as many screen resolutions and hardware profiles as you can, so you can get a good idea of how it performs on the real world. But for people who just want to get started and have a play and figure out whether Mono for Android and MonoGame for Android is actually going to be a worthwhile investment, then this stuff is going to be good. So let's have a look at the hardware accelerated emulator in action. First thing we actually did was convert over a very simple XNA application over to MonoGame for Android. This one's actually a 3D one, because I'm experimenting with the 3D branch at the moment. As you can see, it's just an animated 3D tank that's just looking pretty on the screen, swinging its turret around. So let's have a look at how that looks on the emulator. As with previous screencast, all we've really done is just linked to the appropriate files from the XNA game. There hasn't been any XML files to load in this one, so we haven't had to do any modifications to the content loader here. And again, we're linking to the content that's output by XNA, setting it to Android asset, copy if newer. So that's those three files there. One thing to note, if you do mess around with a 3D image, is in XNA you'll have a tank.fbx, which is your model file. That doesn't just spit out one XNB file, it spits out 2 or 3 or more depending on how many textures you have within the model. So just watch out for that. In this case we had one FBX file, and that spat out these three files here, so we've had to include all of those. So I mean, you know, there's nothing too difficult about that so far. So let's just run up the image, run up the game. This is the hardware accelerated image. I'm not too sure how quick it's going to come across on the screencast, but the user interface is actually pretty snappy now. Obviously not as snappy as a hardware device, but it's a lot better than it used to be. And this is the application actually starting up now. So that's all the model data loaded, and you can keep an eye out. You can tell whether emulation is actually loaded, because Android does actually let you know whether it's come through, whether it's actually using it or not, which is quite good. Let's just wait for it. It's still a little bit slow because the CPU is still an ARM based CPU. It's not actually again, it's still an emulated CPU. And there's the application running. You'll notice we've still got some issues with the models. It looks like the normals on some of the faces are incorrect. They're actually pointing the wrong way. But with a previous emulator image, there is no way this application would have even run, because it would have fallen over at the first hurdle when we tried to initialize OpenGL ES2. And even if we did get an OpenGL 1.1 context, it would have been really slow. So obviously that's working quite nicely. There's still some way to go as far as the 3D stuff is concerned, but the 2D stuff should work really nicely. So what do you need to do to actually get that emulator to use hardware acceleration? Well, the first thing you need to do is to make sure you've got the latest system image down for Android 4.0.3. We just have a look. It's actually revision 2 which you're looking for particularly. Revision 1 doesn't have the hardware acceleration in it. Revision 2 does, as far as I know. I'm sure someone will correct me if I'm wrong. Once you've got that package in, the next thing you need to do is actually create yourself an image which uses that target. So we'll have a look at this one, which I've done. So Android 4.0.3 API level 15, and there's a new hardware flag that you'll need to add in called GPU emulation, and what you need to do is set that to yes. If you set it to no, it will just default back to just software rendering, and if it's not there, it will default to software rendering as well. But adding that in, setting that to yes, that means this particular image will use hardware acceleration. We'll go and have a look at one of the old ones. I'm not 100% sure that this is actually supported. It's in there, but I don't know whether it's probably not supported by the image, so we'll have a play with that. But personally, I'd stick with the 4.03, and obviously that will give you we definitely know the hardware acceleration works on that. One thing to note, obviously, with Android is the platform is quite fragmented, so you still need to test on as many devices as you can once your game's in a state and you want to release, because there's obviously a lot of different CPUs and GPUs out there. They don't always work as you'd like, and there's various screen sizes. Unlike other mobile platforms, you could mention the devices are numerous and they're varied. So certainly, if you're developing a game, try and get hold of hardware devices that you can test on. But if you're just starting out and you'd like to test things out, then obviously the hardware accelerated image is a good way to go. Okay, that just about wraps it up for this screencast. If you're interested in keeping up with all the latest developments in MonoGame, we have a Twitter account which is @MonoGameTeam. Feel free to follow us. There's also information on GitHub and the Coplex site. The discussion forums, if you've got any questions, are always a good place to start. And also we've got a YouTube channel which you can see on the screen there, where we tend to post up videos and stuff on the latest developments and what we're getting up to. So I hope you enjoyed this screencast, and thanks for listening.